The morning mist hung over the village of Ndlovu, wrapping it in a blanket of silver calm. The air smelled of damp earth and firewood, of millet porridge cooking in clay pots, and the soft hum of women singing to the rhythm of dawn. Life in Ndlovu flowed like a slow river, predictable, peaceful, yet filled with unspoken dreams that reached beyond the green hills. At the heart of this village lived a young woman named Amanata, the daughter of a humble fisherman. Her eyes carried the color of twilight, deep, patient, and searching, as though she could see beyond the horizon that caged her world. She was known for her grace, not just of face but of spirit. She spoke little, worked hard, and loved quietly, with a love so fierce it seemed to echo through the drums of time. That love was for Kweku Mensa, the boy who once promised her eternity beneath the giant baobab tree at the edge of the village. It was there, one sunset long ago, that they carved their names into the tree's ancient bark, a promise that their hearts would remain bound no matter where the winds carried them. Kweku was ambitious, restless, and filled with a city-born hunger to make something of himself. He dreamed of leaving Ndlovu, chasing fortune in Lagos, where the streets whispered tales of wealth, lights, and endless opportunity. Amanata had watched him leave one fateful morning, carrying nothing but a small bag and 1,000 hopes. His hand had lingered in hers longer than it should, his voice low as he told her to wait, just a few years, no more than 3. He promised to return for her when he had built a life worthy of her love. The entire village had watched them, smiling at their youthful certainty, the kind that believed time could never break a vow. But time has a cruel rhythm. The seasons turned, one after another. Rain washed over the baobab tree, winds whispered through its branches, and years began to fold into years. Amanata waited. She fetched water from the stream, tended to her father's nets, and every evening she would sit beneath that same tree, tracing the carved initials now fading beneath moss and age. The people of Ndlovu began to whisper. They said Kweku had forgotten her, that he had found another woman in the city. Some laughed softly when they saw her still wearing the small necklace he had given her, a thin copper ring strung on a piece of leather. Others pitied her, calling her the girl frozen in time. But Amanata never responded. Her faith was not loud. It lived quietly inside her, like the flame of a lantern protected from the wind. Years passed, and the world around her began to shift. Children who were once toddlers grew into young men and women. Houses were rebuilt, crops were planted, and still Amanata waited. She refused every proposal that came, from farmers, from traders, even from a widower who promised her comfort and respect. Her answer was always the same: "My heart is already promised." Her father, Babakunda, grew weary. He was a man of the river, simple and wise, and though he admired her loyalty, he feared it had become her prison. One night, as the moon painted silver across the rippling water, he told her that time was not a friend to those who wait too long. But Amanata only smiled softly and said, "Love does not count years, Baba. It remembers hearts." By the 8th year, the stories of Kweku's success began to reach Ndlovu. Travelers from Lagos spoke of a young man from the villages who had risen high, a man with a fleet of taxis, a house in the city, and fine clothes from across the sea. Some swore it was the same Kweku, others said it was just a coincidence of name. Amanata listened, her heart trembling between hope and fear. Still, she waited. There were nights when the loneliness became a storm inside her, when the laughter of married couples felt like knives cutting into her soul, when she'd wake from dreams of Kweku calling her name, only to find the wind whispering through the palm leaves outside. She would hold his old letter, the only one he had sent in those early days, the edges worn, the ink faded, but the words still alive: "I will come back for you, Amanata. When the city makes me a man, I will return as your husband." The village festivals came and went. Drums echoed through the air each harvest season, and Amanata would dance for the joy of others but not for herself. Her beauty deepened, not with youth but with endurance, the quiet glow of a woman who loved without condition. Then came the 12th year. Amanata was no longer the young girl who had waved goodbye to her lover. She was a woman of 30 now, her face serene but marked by the weight of unspoken years. The baobab tree had grown thicker, its roots more twisted, its branches sheltering countless memories. One evening, as the sky blazed orange and red over Ndlovu, she sat beneath it once more, tracing her fingers over their carved names. A gust of wind passed through the leaves, and for the first time, she felt something shift in her heart, not doubt, but a quiet surrender to destiny. That same night, as the village slept, a storm rolled in from the west. Thunder cracked like the drums of ancient spirits, and rain poured over the land with a fury that cleansed everything in its path. The old baobab stood tall against the wind, its roots clutching the earth like a guardian of forgotten promises. When morning came, the air was clean and new. The river shimmered under the sun, and as Aminata walked toward the market, she heard a sound that froze her steps, the roar of a car engine. It was rare to hear such a sound in Ndlovu, where ox carts ruled the paths. Villagers began to gather, eyes wide, murmuring as a shining black car rolled slowly into the village square, its windows tinted, its tires crushing the soft earth. A man stepped out, tall, well-dressed, his shoes polished, his face unfamiliar yet hauntingly known. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching, trembling with something between fear and longing. And when they found her, standing there in her faded blue wrapper, her hair tied simply, her hands trembling, the world seemed to stop. For the first time in 12 years, Kweku Mensah had come home. But as their eyes met, something in his gaze was wrong, a flicker of guilt, of disbelief, of pain he could not hide. And deep inside Aminata's heart, that small flame of faith she had guarded for 12 long years began to tremble. The village watched in silence, as if even the earth held its breath. For what was about to unfold would not only change Aminata's life, it would shake the very meaning of love and loyalty in all of Ndlovu. The morning sun rose shyly over Ndlovu, spilling golden light across the fields still wet from last night's storm. But the village no longer felt the same. Word had spread fast, faster than fire in dry grass, that Kweku Mensah had returned. The man who had left as a dreamer had come back as a stranger draped in city dust and silence. Children peeked from behind trees, women whispered behind their palms, and the old men who gathered by the well shook their heads slowly. The boy they once knew now wore a fine suit, his watch shining brighter than the morning light. His car glistened like something from another world. But it was not the car or his clothes that unsettled them, it was his eyes. They were restless, filled with ghosts of choices made far from home. Aminata stood at a distance, her basket of cassava forgotten in her hands. The sight of Kweku sent ripples through her, not the joy she had imagined all those nights beneath the baobab tree, but something quieter, heavier. Time had changed him. His smile was slower, his posture straighter, his laughter forced. The city had left its fingerprints on him, erasing the innocence of the boy who once carved promises into bark. When he approached her, the crowd melted into murmurs. He spoke her name softly, almost reverently. The sound of it carried years of memories, yet something in it felt rehearsed, as if he was speaking to his past, not his present. Aminata's heart raced, but her face remained calm, the way the river remains still even when its depths are churning. She did not speak, only nodded gently, as the wind lifted her wrapper and sent dust curling around their feet. He told her he had missed her, that the city had swallowed him, that he had worked endlessly to build a future worth returning to. But between his words, Aminata could hear something unspoken, a hesitation, a shadow behind his gaze. Her silence pressed against him, and for the first time, he looked away. The people of Ndlovu rejoiced that day. They slaughtered a goat, danced to the rhythm of drums, and celebrated the return of their son. To them, it was a tale of triumph, the village boy who went away poor and came back rich. But to Aminata, it was the beginning of an unease she could not name. That evening, as the celebrations faded and the moon rose pale and high, she walked once more to the baobab tree. Its bark was rough beneath her fingers, the carved letters now barely visible. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the sound of Kweku's laughter, the scent of his skin when he worked in the fields. But the memory blurred with the man who had stood before her that day, the man who looked like Kweku but did not feel like him. In the days that followed, the air in Ndlovu thickened with curiosity. Everyone wanted to see how the story would end. Would Kweku finally marry Aminata after all these years? Would the promise beneath the baobab finally be fulfilled? Even Baba Kunda, who had long given up hope, smiled quietly as he watched his daughter prepare her best wrapper and tidy their home. Kweku began to visit every day. He brought gifts, perfume bottles, colorful cloths, and small gold trinkets from the city. The villagers watched with awe, but Aminata saw something deeper. His eyes darted often toward the horizon, as though afraid of being seen by someone she didn't know. He spoke of his business, his cars, his connections in Lagos, but never once mentioned what had taken him so long to return. At night, she would light a small oil lamp and pray. She did not pray for his love, for that she had already given long ago. She prayed for truth, that whatever bound them would reveal itself, even if it broke her. One evening, as the sky turned crimson and the call of crickets rose, Kweku arrived again. But this time, his face carried a strange stillness. He told her he would be traveling back to the city soon, that his affairs demanded attention. The words stung her, though she did not show it. Then, as if to soothe the wound he had opened, he made her a promise. He said he would return for good once he had settled everything. He spoke of building her a house, of taking her to the city, of making her life easier than the hard years she had endured. The villagers cheered when they heard this, believing that love had finally won. But Aminata could not sleep that night. Something in his eyes haunted her, a flicker of guilt, like a man trying to hold back a storm. The next morning, before dawn, she walked to the river. The air was cool, the world quiet except for the distant crow of roosters. As she knelt to fill her calabash, she saw her reflection ripple beside the reflection of the baobab tree behind her. It looked old now, its branches reaching toward the sky like pleading hands. And in that moment, Aminata realized something. She had waited so long that her entire life had become a shadow of a promise. The city had taken Kweku, not just in distance but in soul. Yet she loved him still, against reason, against pride, against time itself. She wondered if that was faith or foolishness. 2 days later, he left Ndlovu again. His car disappeared in a trail of dust as villagers waved and shouted blessings. Aminata stood still, her heart a quiet storm. He had promised to return again soon, but promises, she knew, had their own way of fading like carvings in bark. Weeks turned into months. The harvest came and went. The letters stopped coming. And soon, whispers began to rise once more, the kind that sting worse than truth. Travelers from Lagos spoke again. They said Kweku was now a man of great status, but not alone. They spoke of a woman, elegant, wealthy, and with a ring that gleamed brighter than any in the market. The words reached Aminata's ears like thunder rolling across dry land. She did not cry. Her face remained calm, but inside her, something heavy began to crack. She still walked to the baobab tree every evening, still waited as she always had, but now she did not trace the carvings. She only sat in silence, listening to the wind whisper the truth she did not want to hear. 12 years of waiting had taught her patience. But patience cannot heal betrayal. And though no one yet knew the full story, a truth far heavier than rumor was already on its way, a truth that would shake Ndlovu to its core and test the very meaning of love itself. Because the man who had returned was not the same one who left. And the secret he carried back from the city would soon turn the girl who waited into the woman the world would never forget. The days after Kweku's second departure hung over Ndlovu like a gray sky that refused to rain. The villagers had grown restless again, whispering stories to fill the silence he left behind. Some said he was arranging the marriage. Others said he had forgotten Aminata once more. But Aminata no longer sought comfort in what others believed. Her heart had learned that love built on promises alone could become a kind of prison. Each evening, she still went to the baobab tree, not to wait, but to remember. She would sit quietly as the sun melted into gold and crimson, and she would whisper to herself that love was not meant to hurt this long. Yet even in her weariness, she could not stop loving him. The human heart, she knew, rarely obeys reason. Then, one afternoon, as the heat shimmered across the dusty paths, a stranger arrived in Ndlovu. A woman, elegant, confident, and clearly not from the village. Her clothes were modern, her accent heavy with the rhythm of Lagos. She carried herself with the ease of someone who had never known hunger or dust. The moment she stepped from the motorcycle that brought her, every pair of eyes in the market turned toward her. She asked for Aminata. The women at the stalls grew quiet, their hands frozen mid-sail. They pointed toward the river path, where Aminata was washing cassava roots. The stranger walked there slowly, her shoes sinking into the soft earth, her gaze scanning the village as though she were searching for something familiar. Aminata looked up as the woman approached. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, two worlds colliding in silence. The stranger's eyes softened, as though she recognized something she did not want to see. And then, with a voice that trembled beneath its calm, she introduced herself. Her name was Esi Mensa, Kweku's wife. The words fell like stones into the quiet of the riverbank. The air thickened. Even the birds seemed to pause in flight. Aminata's hands froze on the cassava, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and resignation. The woman continued speaking, her tone neither cruel nor apologetic, but weary. Esi explained that she had not come to mock her. She had come because she had found a letter, one Kweku had written long ago but never sent. A letter to Aminata. In it, he confessed that he had once loved her deeply but had been too ashamed to return when life in the city changed him. He had found success, yes, but it had come at a cost. Debts, alliances, and a marriage arranged by his investors to save his business. He had chosen survival over love. And when he finally found the courage to come back, it was not for reunion, but forgiveness. Aminata listened, her heart silent. Each word sank into her like rain into parched soil, heavy and cold. She did not weep. She simply stared at the river, its surface gleaming with light she could no longer feel. Esi reached into her bag and handed Aminata the letter, its edges worn from handling. "He is ill," she said softly. "He wanted you to know before it's too late." For a long moment, neither woman spoke. There was no rivalry, no anger, only the quiet understanding that life had wounded them both in different ways. When Esi left, the villagers rushed to Aminata, hungry for gossip. But she said nothing. She walked past them, her steps slow, the letter pressed against her chest like a wound she could not close. That night, beneath the same baobab tree that had witnessed their promise, she opened the letter. The handwriting was still his, careful, uneven, and full of hesitation. He wrote that he had not meant to disappear, that he had chased wealth to make her proud, but along the way, the city had devoured him. He spoke of the loneliness of success, of how the lights of Lagos could blind a man's heart. He had tried to forget her, but her face haunted his dreams. He wanted to come home, not as a hero, but as a man begging forgiveness. Aminata read the letter again and again until the words blurred through her tears. For 12 years she had waited for love to return. And when it finally did, it came broken. The next morning, she told her father everything. Baba Kunda listened quietly, his weathered face calm. When she finished, he said only one thing: "The river never forgets the rain, my daughter. But sometimes, it must learn to flow without it." Those words stayed with her. They followed her through the fields, through the market, through each silent night that followed. But they also kindled something inside her, a resolve she had not felt before. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from Lagos. It was written not by Kweku, but by Esi. He was dying, she wrote, and his final wish was to see Aminata one last time. The village buzzed with the news. Some begged her not to go, fearing she would reopen wounds that time had barely closed. Others urged her to seek closure. Aminata said nothing. That night, she sat beneath the baobab tree again, the moon full and watchful above her. She thought of the girl she had been, barefoot, laughing, her heart wild with belief. And she thought of the woman she had become, strong, scarred, and unafraid of truth. Before dawn, she packed a small bag. The road to Lagos was long and dusty, winding through farmlands and crowded towns. But Aminata did not travel with bitterness. She traveled with peace. When she arrived at the city's edge, its noise felt like thunder, horns, shouting, engines roaring like beasts. Lagos was everything Ndlovu was not: fast, hungry, alive. She found the address in Esi's letter and climbed the stairs of a tall, worn building. Inside, the air smelled of medicine and regret. And on a narrow bed by the window lay Kweku Mensa, thinner than she remembered, his hair touched with gray, his eyes sunken yet still carrying that same familiar light. When he saw her, his lips trembled. He tried to speak, but tears came first. Aminata stepped closer, her steps quiet as the years between them. She placed her hand gently on his chest, where his heart still fought to beat. And though she said nothing, her eyes spoke all the words she had ever wanted to say. In that silent room, 12 years of love, hope, and heartbreak melted into forgiveness. The city outside roared, but inside, there was only peace, the kind that comes when the heart finally understands that love can exist even when life has moved beyond it. The room smelled faintly of salt and medicine, the curtain swaying gently with the ocean wind that drifted through the half-open window. Lagos pulsed outside, horns, engines, the rhythm of ambition, but within those quiet walls, time seemed to stand still. Aminata sat by Kweku's bedside, her hands folded on her lap, her eyes steady, calm, and full of the kind of love that no longer needed words. He was weaker than she had imagined, his once strong frame now frail beneath the sheets. The proud spark that had once driven him to leave Ndlovu had dimmed to a faint glow. Yet when he looked at her, that glow brightened, as if her presence pulled life back into him. 12 years had carved deep lines into both of them, but they had not erased what they once were. Two hearts joined beneath a baobab tree, believing that forever could wait. He tried to speak, his lips trembling, his breath shallow. Aminata leaned closer, her eyes soft with forgiveness. He told her of the city, how it had promised gold but given chains. How success had demanded sacrifices he was too young to understand. He spoke of the nights when the lights of Lagos burned bright but his soul felt dark, of the moments he thought of her while standing on the balcony of his tall apartment, hearing echoes of drums that only she could have brought to his memory. He told her that guilt had followed him everywhere, that even in the laughter of the woman he had married, he could hear the quiet of Aminata's waiting. He said he had returned to Ndlovu once before, not out of love, but to see if she still remembered him, to test whether she still waited. And when he saw she had, the weight of his choices became unbearable. Tears filled his eyes. His voice broke as he whispered that he had been a coward, that he had wanted to tell her everything that day in the village square, but shame had sealed his tongue. Aminata listened in silence, her gaze distant, as though watching the years replay before her. She did not interrupt. She did not ask why. She simply placed her hand over his and whispered softly, "The river forgives the stone that once troubled it, Kweku. Let your heart rest now." He smiled faintly, and for the first time since his return, peace spread across his face. Esi entered the room quietly, her steps cautious. She had not expected Aminata to come, but her eyes carried no jealousy, only exhaustion. She stood by the door, watching as two souls who had once loved each other untangled the knots time had tied between them. There was something almost sacred about that moment, not of romance, but of understanding. Days passed. Aminata stayed, not as a lover but as a friend. She helped Esi care for him, cooking when the nurses grew weary, humming old village songs that filled the silence. Kweku began to smile again, weakly, briefly, but enough to make Esi weep when she thought no one was watching. Sometimes, when Aminata sat by the window at night, looking out at the restless city lights, she wondered how life had carried them all so far from the simplicity of Ndlovu. The city never slept. It demanded speed, noise, and ambition, yet all the while, she longed for the sound of crickets, for the smell of rain on red soil, for the calm weight of waiting beneath her baobab tree. One evening, the rain began to fall hard against the roof. Thunder rolled like distant drums, and Kweku called for her. She hurried to his side, and he looked at her with eyes that no longer feared death. He told her that he had left something for her, a letter and a small carved pendant. He said it was made from the bark of the baobab tree where they had once made their promise. He had asked someone to send for a piece of it years ago, when longing had nearly broken him. Aminata took the pendant in her hand. Its surface was smooth, worn, but still strong. She felt the weight of it and smiled, not because it was beautiful, but because it was real. A fragment of the past, carried through storms. Later that night, as rain washed over the city, Kweku's breathing grew shallow. Aminata and Esi sat on either side of the bed, their hands holding his as he drifted between worlds. He looked at them both, the two women whose lives he had changed forever, and whispered something neither could forget. "Forgive me, both of you. The city taught me to run, but love taught me how to return." And then, with one final breath, his chest stilled. The rain outside slowed to a whisper, as though the heavens themselves bowed their heads. Esi wept softly, her tears silent but deep. Aminata closed his eyes gently, her face serene. There was no anger in her, no bitterness left to give. She had waited 12 years not for this moment, but for peace, and it had finally come, not in reunion, but in release. They buried him near the sea, where the sound of waves would echo like a heartbeat against eternity. Esi insisted that Aminata place the pendant into his hands before the soil covered him. And as she did, she whispered, "Now the circle is complete." After the burial, Aminata stayed a few more days in Lagos, helping Esi arrange what needed to be done. There was no rivalry between them, only a quiet companionship formed through shared loss. When the time came to leave, Esi hugged her tightly, her voice trembling. "You waited for him," she said. "But in the end, you were the one who freed him." Aminata smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "No," she replied. "He freed me too." The journey back to Ndlovu was long, the road winding through dust and sunlight, through towns that blurred in memory. When she finally arrived, the village greeted her with soft curiosity. They asked questions, offered comfort, whispered condolences. But she did not speak much of what had happened. Some stories, she knew, belonged only to the heart. That night, she walked once again to the old baobab tree. The air was cool, the sky full of stars. She placed her palm on its trunk, the same trunk that had once carried the carved promise of youth. Her fingers traced the fading lines where their names had been, almost vanished now under moss and age. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 12 years, she felt no need to wait. Love had not betrayed her, it had merely changed its shape. She whispered to the night, "May the wind carry his soul home." And when the breeze stirred gently through the branches, she felt it, as if the earth itself had answered. The morning the truth settled upon the land of Odiripo, it was as though the sky itself was holding its breath. The sun rose, slow and hesitant, its golden fingers brushing against the dew-drenched grass that clung to life on the village outskirts. Nina walked alone to the riverbank, the same place where she had once promised her heart to Chukwudi. The same place she had waited every dry and rainy season, whispering prayers to the water spirits, believing her faith could bend time. But that morning, there was no prayer on her lips, only silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words, heavier than grief, older than love itself. The river had always been a witness, of youth, of vows, of waiting. Now, it reflected a woman transformed. Her hands, once soft with hope, bore the calluses of endurance. Her eyes, once bright with dreams, now carried the wisdom of patience and the peace of acceptance. The village had heard the full story, the deception, the betrayal, the suffering, and in their quiet way, they began to see her not as the foolish girl who waited too long, but as the woman who loved too deeply, too purely, in a world that often punished both. Chukwudi had left Odiripo again, unable to face the life he had shattered. They said he went to the city to find work, but some whispered he wandered from town to town, unable to settle, haunted by the face of the woman who once waited for him beneath the palm trees. Others said he drank heavily, trying to drown the guilt that followed him like his own shadow. Nina did not curse him. She did not speak his name again. But sometimes, when the wind carried the scent of dust and mango blossom, her eyes would lift slightly, as if to acknowledge a memory she no longer wished to hold. In time, she found her purpose beyond waiting. The village elders noticed her quiet strength, her way of helping others heal. She began visiting widows, caring for orphans, teaching the young girls the crafts her mother once taught her. People began to come to her not for gossip, but for counsel. Mama Nina, they started calling her, even though she had never borne a child of her own. And when she smiled, those rare, gentle smiles that carried both sorrow and serenity, it was as if she gave others permission to forgive their own pasts too. The years passed like pages turned by unseen hands. The children she once taught grew into women, and they whispered her story as a legend, a caution, a hymn. One day, during the planting season, a stranger appeared at the edge of the village. His clothes were worn, his face tired, his hair touched with gray. He asked for Nina. Some of the young men recognized him from the old stories, the man who left, the one who returned too late. Chukwudi. He found her sitting beneath the same old palm, its leaves now heavy and ancient. She looked up slowly, as though she had sensed his coming long before. There was no anger, no bitterness, only a quiet knowing. Time had done its work. The man before her was not the same one who left with promises in his eyes. He was a man hollowed by regret and softened by loss. He knelt before her, not for forgiveness, but because he could not stand under the weight of what he had done. The villagers watched from afar, their hearts heavy with the sight. No one spoke. No one dared to interrupt what destiny had written. Nina placed her hand gently upon his head, the way a mother blesses a child. The gesture carried no romance, no longing, only release. The river hummed softly behind them, its eternal murmur wrapping the moment in peace. When Chukwudi left Odiripo for the last time, he did not look back. Some said he joined a group of travelers heading north. Others said he went into the forest and never returned. Whatever truth lay behind his disappearance mattered little. His part in the story had ended. Years later, when Nina grew old and her steps slowed, she spent her evenings by the river again, speaking softly to the wind as the sun dipped low behind the hills. The young ones often came to sit near her, eager to hear her stories, to listen to her voice that carried the rhythm of rain on clay rooftops. But when they asked her about the man who once broke her heart, she would only smile and say, "Love is a seed. It may grow in the garden you hoped for, or it may grow wild in the wind. But if you water it with patience, it will always bloom, somewhere." When Nina finally joined the ancestors, the village mourned her as one of their greatest hearts. The women carried her to her resting place by the river, where flowers grew without planting, and the breeze smelled always of peace. On her grave, the elders placed a single palm frond and a stone engraved with words she once spoke to a crying child. The heart that learns to wait also learns to forgive. And forgiveness is the only road that leads home. In the years that followed, travelers passing through Odoripo would sometimes stop by the river to rest. They would hear the locals speak of the girl who waited 12 years for her lover, who loved beyond reason and forgave beyond measure. And as the wind rustled the trees, carrying the soft hum of the water, it felt as if Nina's spirit still lingered, calm, eternal, watching over those who dared to love and lose and love again. For in the end, her story was not about waiting for someone to return. It was about what happens when the waiting itself becomes a journey of becoming, when love stops being a promise from another and becomes a quiet fire within. And so the elders would end her tale with a saying passed down ever since. The river that flows without pride never runs dry, and the heart that waits without anger will one day find peace.